Hello and welcome back to Down to the Tyre. Today I'm joined by a driver who only started karting in 2022 when he was 15 years old, but this year competed in the GB3 Championship in only his second year racing in cars. After coming runner-up in the Ginetta Juniors Championship in 2023, finishing only behind Freddie Slater, he made the step up to the GB3 Championship with the same team that he raced for in Ginetta Juniors, Elite Motorsport. Of course, I'm talking about Hugo Schwarze. We chatted all about his meteoric rise into GB3, how the season has been for him as a whole, finishing in the top 10 of the championship as a rookie, as well as looking ahead to what he's got coming up in 2025. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hugo, you started karting quite recently compared to many drivers who are at the level that you're at in your motorsport career. So my first question is, what do you feel like helped you make the step from karting in 2022 to doing GB3 this year? Because I think it's safe to say that this isn't something that happens often, and this isn't something that just any driver would be capable of doing.
Yeah, exactly. So I started karting 3 years ago when I was 15 and stepped up into Ginetta Juniors after that first year of karting. I think that was sort of the introduction to the whole car racing thing, and I think it was a great step forward. And obviously I did Ginetta Juniors with Elite. So when they asked me to do a test with them in GB3 and it went really well, that was sort of the point where we thought, okay, maybe it's worth considering a step into GB3. But yeah, I think the kickstart, let's say, to racing in GB3 was doing Ginetta Juniors with Elite.
Yeah, that makes sense. Having that kind of progression ladder and having the team who are willing to help you through that, I imagine must have been really
Yeah,
helpful. But I've also got to
definitely.
ask, how did you start karting it in the first place as a 15-year-old? What kind of got you on the track for the first time?
Yeah, so I always loved motorsport, loved cars. And I used to spend loads of time at the track, but just watching with my dad or something. I live in Cologne, which is an hour from Spa, an hour from the Nürburgring, so it's the perfect location, really. And yeah, I used to play professional hockey, and I was on my way to play in the national team as well. One day I got an injury, so I had to stop doing all that, and I couldn't really do anything for 2 years. I had crutches, had braces on my knees, so I looked a bit like Forrest Gump. Um, but yeah, then my dad got me a racing simulator because that was the only thing I could do really. And obviously, I was on a day and night. And one day I got the opportunity to drive a racing kart, and probably from the sim racing experience, I was quick from the beginning. So the owner of the kart told me and my dad, okay, I think it's worth giving it a go. So yeah, we decided to do our first season in karting, and it went really well.
Obviously, we've spoken about how Elite were essentially in that progression from Ginetta Juniors to GB3. But what allowed you to make that progression from karting to Ginetta Juniors, and what drew you to that championship in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I was quite lucky to have an experienced racing driver in my karting team who was there with his son. So basically, I raced in the same karting team as his son, and throughout the year, he watched my progression. He was really, yeah, honestly, but at the point where he was okay, that's what you're doing is really good. Was my last European karting championship race. So I started with German championships in karting, and as soon as I got my license, I ranked up and went to Europe or European races. And my last race at Genk, it was a rainy final, and I made my way up from P25, I think it was, to P7, and that's when he was like, okay, this is good. This is really good. And then he took me and his son to England to drive it in to junior because he was looking at options for his son as well. And yeah, it was really impressed from Elite Motorsport. And yeah, that's when we decided to go into Ginetta Juniors.
Within Ginetta Juniors, obviously that progression from karting to cars, I feel like everyone talks about how difficult that is.
Yeah.
What did you find when you started the Ginetta Juniors like series? What did you find were the hardest things for you to adapt to, or any challenges that you had, like shifting to cars from cars? or do you feel like you kind of took to it quite easily and it was quite natural to you?
I think it was actually quite natural. But obviously going into genetic juniors where the racecraft has to be quite good and there's loads of racing, I think that was probably the most difficult part for me. Obviously coming from 1 year of karting, to drive against experienced karters from all around the world. That was probably the thing, like learning racecraft, learning what to do in different situations. So driving the car was pretty straightforward, I felt. Um, and I think it was quite natural with the feeling of a genetic junior. But yeah, racecraft was probably the most important thing and what I learned the most in the genetic junior year as well.
And I mean, the Genetic Juniors grid is never an easy one to compete against. There's always so many talented drivers. I mean, the year you did it, you had Freddie Slater to compete with. And
Yeah,
I think everyone in the kind of feeder series world knows his name, knows how
definitely.
talented
Yeah.
he is. So what was it like kind of going against drivers who you knew maybe had a bit more experience in karting than you? And not only that, to be able to challenge them and beat them at times as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was super lucky to be able to race against Freddie. I think there's no driver I could have learned more from. With his experience, I mean, he's been sitting in the car since he's very young and in the car as well. So going up against him and being able to actually compete against him was obviously a really good feeling in my second year of racing. But yeah, I wasn't quite there to battle him for the championship. But it was definitely getting closer towards the end of the year, and I felt like I was learning quite a lot. So I think I'm very lucky actually to be able to have raced against him and learned from him.
I mean, no one came closer to him in the championship
Yeah,
than you. So, like,
yeah,
what's that like to know that like there are so many talented drivers in that grid that you beat?
yeah.
Did you go into that season expecting to be able to come runner up?
Actually, no. I was looking. The team said, "Okay, you've actually got a shot at a top three championship position." But me and my parents were like, okay, we'll just have a go and see how it goes. We're not expecting too much. The matter is just learning as much as I can. Um, but yeah, as soon as we came to Alton Park for the first round, I think it was clear, okay, I've actually got a shot at this. Triple podium on the weekend was incredible, to be honest. And yeah, that was the turning point of me realizing, okay, I'm in the championship fight. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure based on that Alton Park must be one of your favourite tracks in the UK based on your results
Yeah.
there. But what other tracks do you kind of like have a soft spot for, particularly enjoy driving? And are there any tracks that you prefer in like you prefer driving in a Genetic Junior versus a GB3 or vice versa? Like, were there any tracks that
Yeah.
you didn't like in a Genetic Junior that you then got to do in a GB3 car and you were like, oh, actually, I like this track?
Actually, it's Alden Park. I liked it in a Genetic Junior. I wasn't too big of a fan in GB3. I guess it was the first round of the season as well, and I hadn't done much testing before that, so jumping straight into Alden Park was probably quite difficult in a single seater and the GB3 especially. But I really enjoyed both years in at Brands Hatch. It's an incredible track, and I love tracks that have elevation and all of that stuff. So bit more old school, I think. But yeah, I think I have to say my favorite track is the Nürburgring Nordschleife for sure.
I mean, I've got to ask about that because even though obviously GB3, I mean, I was going to say the majority of the races are based in the UK, but I don't even know if they are anymore because there are so
Yeah,
many opportunities in that championship to race outside of the UK now. How
yeah,
exciting has it been to do the series in a year where so many of those opportunities have widened? Because I remember when I kind of first got into GB3, like it raced at Spa, but that was kind of it in terms of
yeah,
outside of the UK. Whereas now it's there's multiple tracks in the kind of
yeah,
European sector, kind of coming over to
yeah.
GB3. So what was that like?
I think it's pretty cool to be honest. I mean, racing at Spa especially is a highlight I think for every driver. It's just a track you can associate with watching Formula One and watching all those other championships. So it's definitely a cool feeling racing outside of England for once. Although I have to say the old school UK tracks are very cool. But yeah, for example, Hungaroring, Sanford, they were cool tracks as well, and I've really enjoyed racing at those, especially because we didn't have any testing before that. So it was kind of okay, which driver can be at the front without having done any testing for that. And I was quite competitive at those tracks, which is obviously a very good sign.
Absolutely. And I feel like in recent years, especially, GB3 has really gained kind of recognition both in the UK but also around the world as a really strong feeder series to compete in. The amount of drivers who have stepped up to F3 from from GB3 has increased a lot, I'd say, in the past couple of years. Do you think it is that kind of European presence that's helped GB3 to do that, or do you think it's simply just the people are recognizing the quality of the drivers, the cars, the championship as a whole?
I think it's a mixture of both. Obviously, racing in Europe helps with that. But I also think that the competition in the past couple of years has gotten better and better. And obviously, if someone steps up from GB3 into F3 and as well, people say or people look at it and see, where did he come from? GB3. Okay, might have a look at that. So I think drivers stepping up into championships, high championships, and proving themselves probably helps the most with that. But yeah, of course, more European circuits means more attention, and obviously super license points as well now, which is good. Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, just I think yesterday before we were recording this, it was announced that Luke Browning is going to be doing FP1 with Williams. Obviously, he won
Yeah.
GB3 a couple of years back now. So yeah, like the opportunities that some of those drivers have gone on to is huge, especially in recent years. Are there any particular drivers kind of higher up the feeder series ladder, whether that's drivers who have done GB3 or haven't, that you kind of really look up to their journey and you're really inspired by that?
Yeah, a couple of drivers actually. For example, Zach O'Sullivan, who obviously can't race in F2 anymore because of budget reasons, but he had a similar sort of journey. Obviously, he did British F4 as well and stuff like that. But yeah, there's a couple of drivers that I not necessarily look up to, but I look at their journey and say that's very impressive. Colin Pinto as well, obviously, he didn't have the budget to race, so he went over to move away from single seaters. He did European Le Mans and still got back to doing F2. So I think that's quite inspiring. So managing to get back into the single seater world, which obviously can be quite difficult.
So we've basically named every Williams Driver Academy driver ever now in this
Yeah,
episode. They've got a great academy. What can I
they
say?
do. They do.
But yeah, they're both great examples as well.
Yeah.
Obviously O'Sullivan, yeah, coming through that kind of same GB3 route, and yeah, Colin Pinto has been doing incredible things in F1
Oh yeah.
lately. So two great drivers to look up to. In
Yeah.
terms of kind of your experience in GB3 with Elite, obviously I know you'd worked with the team before, so you kind of, I imagine you were quite integrated already, but what was it like working with the team in GB3? I mean, they're a solid team to be with, so I imagine it was a good
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah, obviously the team is quite different to the Gillette Junior team. A lot of new faces and a lot of different viewpoints and different ways of working. In genetic juniors, you have a mechanic and then a coach who goes through all of the videos and datas with all the drivers. Whereas in GB3, you have two mechanics per car, an engineer, a coach. So it's quite more professional, let's say. And it's a different level. But I really enjoyed working with Elite. It's honestly felt like a family. Being with them for 2 years. Yes, I was very happy with them. Yeah.
I've got to ask about your teammates as well. Obviously,
Yeah.
having two teammates, I imagine there's, especially as a rookie, there's so much you can kind of learn from them. What was your relationship like with both your teammates? And then also, are there any things throughout the year that you can kind of pinpoint that you've learned from either of them that you're going to take forward with you?
Yeah, I think it was really good actually having two competitive teammates and two teammates that have done it for 1 or 2 years already. I could learn loads from them. And being in the GB3 championship and being in that new kind of surrounding, it definitely helped to have someone help you out with that and showing, okay, this is what you have to do, this is what you can do. And I think they've helped me quite a lot this year. And yeah, I'm very grateful for that, obviously. But also looking at the data, of course. If you have someone to look at their data, then obviously it's very helpful. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Like as you said, they're both very experienced drivers within the GB3
Yeah,
Championship. In terms of the overall season, going from like start at Alton Park to the end of the season, that was a couple of months ago now. I think maybe about a month ago now.
yeah.
What were kind of looking back at it as a whole? What were kind of like the highs and the lows for you? Are there any moments that kind of stand out as memories that were particularly good or bad, or anything that yeah sticks with you?
Yeah, so I think the positives were the progression for throughout the year. I think starting off at Alton Park, it was always going to be difficult stepping in from a genetic union to GB3. But looking at the last race weekend at Brands Hatch, qualifying in P4, um, qualifying in P5, and then first race P4, I think that's really positive. One of the negatives was Donington Park. It was a letdown for the whole team, really. Um, we just struggled with setup issues the whole weekend, and it didn't really go our way. But no, yeah, nonetheless, I think the whole season was a positive, really. Just learning every race weekend and every test session, and that's the main thing, really.
I always say this because I was actually at that Donington Park round.
Yeah,
Because I live about 20 minutes away from Donington Park.
yeah,
So I go to so many events there. And in every podcast episode, I will bring up Donington Park without
yeah,
fail. But I knew it wasn't maybe the highlight of the year for you. So I
yeah,
was like, I'm not going to bring up Donington unless he does.
yeah, yeah.
Because yeah,
I have,
it's a circuit that I love very dearly, but also would very much understand if you weren't so fond of it at this point in time.
yeah, yeah,
Amazing. So obviously we've got to, I don't think we've actually said this out loud yet, but you were top 10 in the championship this year, which is
yeah.
obviously amazing when you, especially when you look at the grid this year, how competitive it was.
Mhm.
As a rookie alone, getting in the top 10 is good, let alone
Yeah,
as a rookie who it's his like, you know, second season in cars overall.
yeah.
Um, how do you feel like knowing that you were top 10 in the championship? Like, is it something you're very proud of? Is it something that you expected to happen?
Well, let's not say expected, but I was hoping for it to happen. Um, yeah, being a driver that hasn't done any single seater before, I think I was the only driver in the championship, so that kind of didn't put me on the back foot. But obviously, the other drivers had some more experience with that. So I always knew that I was gonna catch up towards the end of the season, and obviously I was looking at the championship positions and seeing, okay, I wanna finish there, and I think I did fill my expectations, and I think I did very well this season. But yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do you feel like throughout the year, whether they're your teammates or not, were there any drivers who you felt you had particularly strong battles with, kind of were direct like competitors to you, kind of in terms of like where you were qualifying and finishing the races? Is there anyone that kind of stands out as drivers you were battling a lot throughout the year?
That's a good question, actually. I think the the grid positions and the drivers I was racing against was actually quite different from race to race. And obviously in the GB3 Championship, there's sadly not a lot of racing, at least this year. Um, when you look at Alton Park or Hungaroring, they're tracks that are quite difficult to overtake on due to the aero wash. But yeah, I think I had some good battles with William McIntyre, just holding him off, trying to attack. For example, the last race we could Rantatch or Donington the weekend before. It's good to have a driver behind you that can put you under pressure and you have to withstand it. Yeah,
In terms of obviously, I know we've said there's kind of like three races per round. One of those is reverse grid, which
yeah.
is always quite interesting to watch and I imagine to drive as well. How did you kind of approach those races, knowing how different they'd be to just the other two, which are just you qualify, you race in that order?
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, the reverse grid race is just about absolutely sending it, to be honest. I mean, it's the last race of the weekend, nothing to lose really. Obviously, you have to still be sensible, but for every position you gain, you get several points or more points. So I think for every driver, it was really okay, just try and make up as much positions as possible. which often creates chaos in those races. I think actually it wasn't too bad this year. And I think it was a step forward from the year before where it was a full reverse grid, which might have been too chaotic. But yeah, I think my approach was just, okay, do as much as I can. Just go for the moves. You've got nothing to lose. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I feel like GB3 is one of the only championships that's been brave enough to attempt a full reverse
Yeah,
grid.
yeah,
Um, it was definitely produced some interesting
it did.
events, but
Yeah,
yeah, probably best that that has
yeah,
been abandoned now.
yeah,
But yeah, in terms of obviously doing the GB3 championship this year, obviously Elite put you in that test and the test went well, you went to that
yeah.
championship. If you hadn't had that support from a team that could provide you with such a clear progression path to GB3, what do you think you would have ended up doing otherwise? Do you think you still would have looked into doing GB3, or were there any other championships you would have considered?
That's a good question actually, and I think yeah, Elite helped me with that a lot, and it was a good team to move up with. I was looking at other options. Obviously, I was looking at Carrera Cup or F4, British F4 as well. Um, but the budget for GB3 was actually really good, and that's why the GB3 Championship this year at least was so good because I think it was very good value for money. And that's why we ended up doing it as well, because you get loads of drive time and good tracks and a good car. So yeah, obviously it's always difficult to say what would I have done if I didn't race in GB3. But I think it would have, yeah, either been British F4 or Carrera Cup.
Yeah, because I feel like there's obviously British F4 and then there's GB4 as well here in the
Yeah,
UK. So there are a good couple of F4 options that a lot of drivers end up going for.
yeah,
In terms of maybe for any listeners who aren't from the UK or who aren't as familiar with the championships, could you just explain how the GB3 car is a progression on that F4 car? And then
yeah.
also, I think how it compares to the FIA F3 car, because I think that's a question that a lot of people have.
Yeah, so obviously next year there'll be a new car in the GB3 Championship, which will be a, let's say, huge step up from what we had this year. But compared to the British F4, basically it's got a lot more downforce, more horsepower. Um, that's about it really. It's quite a lot faster than the British F4. But obviously it's got the similar characteristics of a single seater car. And looking to FIA 3, obviously the car next year I think will be quite similar. It's supposed to have DRS as well, more horsepower, more downforce. At the end of the day, the F3 car will probably always be a little bit faster. That's just how it has to be, probably. But yeah, I think it's going to be a big step up.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to see that new
Yeah,
car out on track. Speaking of kind of obviously we mentioned FIS3, we've mentioned GB3 next year.
yeah,
Obviously, we've got to talk about kind of what your plans are going
yeah,
forward. And I always say to drivers, I don't want to get them in trouble. I don't want you to leak
yeah.
anything that you're not allowed to. But also, if there's anything you can kind of tease, anything you can speak about, then yeah, what's coming up for you next year?
To be honest, I have no clue what I'm doing next year yet. Obviously, I've got my preferences and my different options. I've got some good options for a variety of different things. Um, I would have obviously loved to do GB3, and it's still an option. But obviously, with the new car, the budget has gone up quite a lot as well. So yeah, I'm obviously looking at it, but I think it's very unlikely that I will be doing it next year. Um, but yeah, I'm also looking at GT options, sport car options, and I think that's probably the likely way to go. Racing in Europe somewhere to gain that experience and maybe become a factory driver.
That's really cool. And I was saying this, I had Chloe Grant from GB4 on the podcast a few
Yeah,
weeks ago, and she was talking about exploring kind of options outside of single seaters as well,
yeah,
not limiting herself to kind of the single seaters ladder and looking at maybe like some potential GT options and stuff. Is that something that obviously budget is a huge thing for any driver, and it's something that
yeah.
every driver has to consider in the back of their mind whenever they're making a decision. Um, but how do you kind of feel about those opportunities? Like, I feel like a lot of drivers who've done karting for their whole lives have that vision of F1 from when they're a little kid.
Yeah,
Obviously,
yeah.
for you, it's a bit different because you started karting a little bit later. So, kind of, what is your that kind of vision going forward? Are you equally as open to those opportunities outside of single seater?
Yeah, so obviously my dream is F1, and I would have loved to continue on in single seaters, and maybe that will still happen. Um, but it's also you have to be realistic, and you have to look at the budget that you have and have to plan ahead. So you don't just go into the next season and don't know what you're doing after that. You have to kind of plan 2 or 3 years ahead, and that's quite difficult to do in single seaters with the budgets that are thrown around. So I think sports cars or GTs are yeah, let's say easier on the budget, and easier to plan ahead maybe. But yeah, I'm open to everything. To be honest, I when I was younger, I watched quite a lot of GT racing and hypercars, and well, it was called LMP1 back then. But that's why I'm very open for other options as well. I think as long as I'm racing, I'm happy, to be honest. So yeah,
That's the thing that happens with a lot of drivers, I think, especially slightly further up the ladder, who
yeah,
are very committed to staying on that single seaters path. They often end up, especially when you get to kind of the F2 level, often end up without a seat in a kind of a reserve role or in a like kind of off track role where they're not actually in a car fighting for a
yeah.
championship. What's your kind of thoughts on that? I know it's slightly further up the ladder from where you are at the moment, but what are your thoughts on kind of how difficult obviously how difficult it is to get into F1 these days, and
Yeah.
also your thoughts on kind of like the decisions that some drivers are making in terms of how they are managing that.
Yeah. Obviously super difficult to say, but there's not a lot of space in Formula One. Maybe in 2026 there'll be another team as you've probably seen as well. And that probably opens up a few more opportunities, but it's not going to change the fact that it's super difficult. It's 20 or well, it's going to be 22 drivers in the championship. Um, and yeah, the drivers with backing from an F1 team obviously have the first kind of option. So I think if you're not in one of those F1 academy teams, then it's very unlikely that you have the chance to race in Formula One. But I obviously understand from my perspective as well that you don't want to give up on your dreams and you want to go as far as possible and still want to try to make it to F1. But yeah, I think it's very unlikely if you're not in an F1 academy.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of the opportunities that are available, I know we've seen a lot of drivers kind of decide to step away from that and go to things like IndyCar or WEC, or there's so many different options,
Yeah.
Formula E being another as well. Um, in terms of your own career, looking to championships that are on that kind of level, what would you say either your dream championship or your dream car is to drive? I feel like everyone always says 24 hours of Le Mans for this.
I mean, obviously, 24 Hours of Le Mans is super special and super cool. I think the race I grew up with and watched every year and was fascinated with it was the 24 Hours of Nürburgring. Um, I sat at the track for all the night and kept watching, and that's what got me into motorsport as well. So I'd probably have to say if I had to race a one-off race, it would be the 24 Hours of Nürburgring. But obviously there's so many opportunities, so many great races. Looking at IndyCar, WEC, IMSA, Formula One, of course, or also if you go to Asia, Super Formula is special as well. So there's loads you could do. But I think for me it would have to be 24 Hours of Nürburgring.
Do you have a dream car as well that you'd like to drive?
I do. The Porsche 992 GT3 from Manta Racing, the Greta. That's probably the car that I supported all my life really, or all my well, when I was at the track, I was always rooting for it. So racing in that car would be a dream come true for sure.
I'm glad you gave some different answers to what everyone else gave. Everyone else
Yeah,
was like Le Mans. It like
yeah,
that is no, but
yeah.
yeah, I mean 24-hour racing in general is so cool.
It is. Yeah, yeah,
It's amazing.
yeah.
And yeah, as you said, Super Formula as well. That's one I forgot to mention. I had a Jake Sanson on the podcast a few months
Okay,
ago,
yeah,
and he actually lives in Asia now, but he's
Yeah,
so into kind of Super GT, Super Formula, and everything. So
nice. Yeah,
I think I'm always like just always excited to talk about any because everyone knows how great F1 is, but I'm always
yeah.
excited to talk about opportunities that are
Other, yeah, exactly.
outside of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, best of luck with everything. Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
very
being on the
much.
podcast today.
Of course,
I'll admit GB3 is one of my favorite series. So
it is. Yeah, yeah,
one of my guests I've been most excited to speak to so far. So thank you so
yeah.
much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
And all of Hugo's socials will be in the description, so you can go and check him out, see what he's doing next year because it's still a bit of a mystery.
Yeah.
And yeah, keep up to date with him. So thanks again to Hugo for coming on the podcast today.